It's the first National Council of State meeting of this administration. In attendance are governors, the President of the Senate, some ministers, and former Chief Justices of Nigeria, as well as presidential aides. Former Presidents Muhammadu Buhari and Goodluck Jonathan were physically present, while retired Generals Abubakar Abdulsalam and Yakubu Gowon joined the meeting virtually. President Bola Tinubu arrives to preside over the meeting. Over 5 hours later, a delegation arrives to outline the highlights of the meeting. As expected, the recent hardship protests were considered following a report by the National Security Advisor, Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, on the security situation in the country and the protest.
The council thanked Nigerians at large for resisting any unconstitutional move to change government. If anybody is not satisfied with the government, any current administration, there's always an election coming. So you wait for election and cast your vote the way you deem fit.
Aside from Mr. Dele Alake, 6 other ministers made presentation to the council on the progress made in each sector of the economy, with emphasis on economic diversification. According to the Minister of Finance, the council commended the economic drive of the current administration, which according to him is yielding positive results.
In broad terms, the economy is growing. The balance of payments, in particular, the trade balance and the current account balance, are in surplus. The exchange rate is stabilizing. And inflation, though high, uncomfortably high, for the liking of Mr. President and his team, it is slowing and it is set to fall.
The Kwara State Governor said the council commended the president after listening to the presentations by the ministers.
The high note of the meeting was the unanimous passage of a vote of confidence on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces. Members, especially those of the Nigerian Governors Forum, were satisfied with the presentation by the members of the Federal Executive Council.
Following this meeting, the governors went into another meeting with the president, this time a closed-door meeting where they say they had a fruitful discussion, which made them realize that they are on the same page. They also had a high point in that meeting when another vote of confidence was given to Mr. President. From the presidential villa, Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
All right, so we've got Ambassador Abdul Fattah Musa here with us. He is the ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So quite a lot going on, and most recently, this meeting by the Council of States in Nigeria, Abuja, where the National Security Advisor did brief those present, and there were some concerns. And it turned out, which lots of people, it's still unfolding, as a matter of fact, because for a lot of people, they thought, look, they went out there, normal protests as a result of the hunger, what they're going through, trying to point out their economic situation, which to them is not good. But from security perspective, they think that from what they have garnered, about billions of naira, dollars that have been seized for those who were, according to them, contributing to this protest, and then the flying of Russian flags raising more concerns. I know ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense staff did meet some time ago to see how they could also, towards having a lot of peace in the sub-region. So for you, is there any cause of concern from what you've seen about the protest and the news coming through so far?
Yes. There is, cause for concern over the recent protests in across, Nigeria. The concern is not about the right of people, the young people, the unemployed, and others who feel that they are being shortchanged. They are hungry and they are angry. So that right is enshrined in the Constitution, and I think the Nigerian government allowed for peaceful demonstration. That is the beauty of democracy. The other aspect of it is the demonstration being hijacked by interest in order to move the agenda beyond the immediate concerns of the demonstrators. And that is going as far as calling for the military to step in. And the worst of it all is the flying of foreign flags during, these demonstrations, in the country. And it reflects a wider malaise in the region that for some time now, West Africa and Africa broadly is becoming an arena of a new Cold War, where the NATO powers and their followers, the BRICS, you are talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what have you, and their supporters on the other hand, and then you've got in the middle powers, middle level power from the Middle East and others who are all now involved in the political discourse and developments in Africa. So if you look at the color of the flags, and I don't want to name them, it reflects the divide. What are the characteristics? Those flying those flags are mimicking where the region has experienced military takeovers in the country. You are talking about Mali, you are talking about Niger, you are talking about Burkina Faso in particular. And those flags are those behind them. So the symbolism of those flags is that we need military takeovers here as well. And that we've got supporters who will, come and support you like they are supporting these cool countries. That is the symbolism of it. And for me, the danger of it is most of the young people who are demonstrating are just about a generation old.
Yeah.
Okay, they are a generation old. They never experienced military coups before. So for them, they see the romance in it. All right, but
that can be a danger.
Is different.
So, but the thing now is this. While it is difficult or it may be challenging for several people who were part of that protest to actually say, well, yes, that was a thing, but this other reality exists. So for you, how does, say, probably ECOWAS intelligence unit or team or arm take this? Because while you have people in this country who feel, look, I genuinely went out there to protest, so why should I be concerned about that? And then you see those flying foreign flags. So does ECOWAS think, the security unit following that meeting, is there such that, well, maybe somebody is trying to fly a kite to score political points? So is the team able to distill all of these things? How do they regard it? Is it high alert, mid-level alert, or what exactly in ECOWAS?
See, there are fifth columnists in each country. There are internal forces who would want destabilization because they will benefit from it. But if you follow the ECOWAS statement, which was issued shortly after the attacks by terrorist groups and the Tuareg rebellion in the northern part of Mali, just around 24th to 27th of July, last month, ECOWAS clearly, stated, that it will do everything to fight the transformation of our region into another arena of superpower confrontations. And why did we say that? The dichotomy in the Russian Ukraine war is being played out in West Africa with the Ukrainians, the ambassador in Senegal, and the chief of their intelligence in Ukraine saying that they provided intelligence and more to those who carried out those attacks. So it means the war in Ukraine is being transferred and being played out also in Africa.
This is despite Africa's insistence on being neutral, because a lot of African countries came out in the wake of that war to say that they weren't going to take sides. So in spite of it, it does appear that somehow, we're beginning to see an incursion of, that particular battle entering into Africa.
Absolutely. Today.
What about, because that's not the only war that's currently playing out, because we've also seen the influence of the war between Israel and Gaza. I mean, the incursion of Israel into Gaza and how that is also playing out, especially with regards to religion. And, religion in Africa is a very sensitive issue as well. So how is that also influencing what is happening on the continent?
Yes. Let me say this, the first, issues first. I couldn't get the first part of your question.
Yeah, which was about the Ukraine. I mean, a lot of African countries saying they were going to be neutral.
Yeah, that is right. At the UN Security Council, that council is paralyzed because it is also divided among the P5 who have veto power. It's divided along those same lines. Right? That is it. So they had to move the debate to the General Assembly of the UN, and most African countries stayed neutral, as far as the request to condemn Russia was concerned, in the Ukraine war, right? But what Ukraine is doing is like it is going to lose more and more friends in Africa. That is number one. Number two, we know that it is the Russian private security company that is supporting the Malian authorities in their fight against the terrorists in the country. So what Ukraine is doing is fighting Russia also on the African continent, which will go very much against its own interests on the continent. And the global scene also reflects what is happening. You just mentioned the attacks on Gaza. The Jewish state is not a Christian state. Okay, they've got their religion. And among the Palestinians, a very large chunk of them are Christians. They are not all Muslims. So it is not, really a religious issue when you are talking about what is happening.
Well, I'm saying that how it's been interpreted on the continent, in Africa.
Of course, it is because in Africa we are quite gullible. Okay, so that is it. Israel is the birthplace of, Jesus, and then, so all Christians will flock, majority of them, to support them, right? That is one. But what we forget is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is also in Israel. You see that people do not, take, into consideration. But looking at the broader issues in Africa, terrorism, particularly the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, they are also instrumentalizing faith. Even though most of the people where they operate are Muslim, they still interpret which is the proper Muslim and which is not. And this has also transferred into ethnic animosity. Who is a Fulani? Who is not a Fulani? Who is a herder? Who is a farmer? So all these are being instrumentalized by those who want to destabilize the continent. And leading them are these terrorist groups.
All because one way or the other, Africa and its sub-regions are perceived as some kind of go-to right now. I find it very interesting that Europe is as united as it is, even though a European country and another European country, in this case Russia, even though part of it is in Asia, fighting, so to speak, at war. But a few things happened, and they've been able to keep themselves both economically and politically together. Now, look at all of the things that are happening in West Africa, with some West African countries making statements as to wanting to exit from ECOWAS. And I find that very interesting. While all of that is happening in Europe, none of it is, some similar things are happening in West Africa, yet it seems that the effect is more politically severe in West Africa than it is in Europe. What does that speak to about whether or not the West African authorities, and particularly ECOWAS as an authority itself, has enough influence, political or economic influence, on its member states?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Don't forget, the most terrible wars that we found, that the world has experienced, have always originated in Europe. And I agree with you, through the ashes of the First World War, Second World War, EU is born, which is trying to bring, them together. But Africa's situation has been since independence, right? Africa gained independence at the height of the Cold War, if you remember, where you had a bipolar world, the East and the West, and African countries fell into these camps, were used by others. So Africa's exploitation goes way back, to the post-independence era. And then at some point, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it seems like the world was moving multilateral. We're going to have a multilateral world, and it also coincided with the time that there was unity in Africa. As far as basic principles of democracy, human rights were universally accepted. You hardly found coup d'etats from about 1992, when Africa transited. And you see the mirror, of what happened in the 60s, 70s is what we are seeing now, but now in a more diverse way, which means Africa has not learned, its history, that what happened during the Cold War, and African countries were being used as vassal states, as proxies in superpower battles, is now being repeated on the continent, and this time using proxies, because Ukraine is not a power that you can talk about. It's also a proxy of Western powers being used as an instrument, also to, fight the other side. That is the Russia, the Chinese influence, and others on the continent. And the sad thing is that Africa is drawing itself into, that picture. And
what do you think makes that possible? Because Africa has its serious peculiar problems, one of which is poverty. And the issues around good governance among the various countries is not just a West African thing. It's not just a Nigerian thing. It's an African thing. But let's stick with our own West Africa, particularly because the effect of the not so good governance in recent time has led to military putsch in some areas. And what is happening in Nigeria is no less significant. So what are we, or what should we be communicating to the young people to let them see that we own our own and we shouldn't be dancing or parleying to certain sentiments as you're talking about now?
I think member states, for example, of ECOWAS, have a responsibility to reassure the young people, that democracy, human rights are not empty slogans, and that it has to be backed up by really giving meaning, to life to these young people. The young people in West Africa constitute a minimum 60% of the population. And if you see the disturbances that are going on, it's because they are disenfranchised, they are marginalized, and others. And it is very important that member states live up to that. The beginning is good governance, which begins with political good governance. The political aspect of it, that is no manipulation of constitutions in our member states, and that there should be inclusivity in the governance process, and those are key principles. And ECOWAS is reviewing its supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance, to ensure, that manipulating constitutions and electoral processes becomes more and more difficult. But the most important thing is it is citizens who can make it work and not the norms. If you look at what is happening in parts of West Africa and what recently happened in Senegal, it gives you the contrast. In Senegal, citizen action, the strength of institutions made it impossible, for the ruling party in power to derail the normal course of politics in the country. In other parts where the citizenry is dormant, and you have a graveyard stability in the country, then the rulers will do whatever they want. So building the capacity of institutions, the citizenry, is also a supportive plank, to the normative reforms that we are, talking about. That is number one. Number two is the economic aspect. And ECOWAS, given what has happened in the region, the heads of state at the July summit in Abuja decided that ECOWAS should lead a special summit, not a summit of heads of state, a special summit on the future of regional integration. ECOWAS were created first and foremost for economic, purposes, right? Yeah. And it is the realities of our region about the collapse of states. Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria had to lead ECOMOG into this country to stabilize them. It was all out of bad political governance in those countries, with people seeking more freedom from autocratic and military regimes in the region, right? So ECOWAS had to pivot, into the political arena, because you cannot carry out economic integration without when stability. There is instability everywhere.
That seems to be overshadowing some of the economic objectives of ECOWAS.
Yes, and ECOWAS has achieved a lot when it comes to the economic, the economic field. In terms of the, ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme that is supposed to push African countries to add value, to their raw materials and other things. Is the free movement. People, I can't take it for granted. It is a major achievement, and West Africa is about the only country now, the only region, where there is visa-free travel. People do not take that also for granted. There are a whole lot of interventions in the economy, but the bulk stops at the member states level.
So there are several things that come to mind listening to you on this. Several. I mean, is it about the objectives? What is it that ECOWAS is going to do specifically to ensure that their member states, the heads of those member states, don't keep manipulating the elections? Because if you look at some of the key objective and some of the thread of the protesters in some of these countries, largely in Africa, where they have happened, the people always complain, number one, about elections not properly done. Some you get to hear our leaders are puppets, either to IMF or some of these bodies. They keep wondering, why do they have to go to some of those countries to have those meetings before you come back here? Do they select you, then you force it on us? So they still don't believe that they are genuine leaders who mean well for those countries. Mm-hmm. And that's why we wonder, what specifically ECOWAS will do in those reforms that you're talking about. How do they address all of this? Can ECOWAS, can Africans help themselves from these countries that want to keep using us as playground?
No, absolutely. I think I alluded to that in my earlier response. That is, if you look at our liberal democracy as an experience from about the 1992 up till now, what are its strengths? So far, there have been progress up until 2019. All presidents in our region were democratically elected. The level of transparency in the elections that brought them to power varies from country to country. But that was the fact. And since 2020 till now, we've had about 4 successful coups, many unsuccessful coups, right? And some of the coups, particularly in Guinea, the basis was manipulated electoral process by the then sitting president, right? So ECOWAS has realized that at the core of the constitutional convergence criteria of ECOWAS membership is separation of powers. If you look at West Africa, some of our parliaments are now becoming more combative. They are not monocolor. You go to countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Cabo Verde, Senegal, you just see that the government, the ruling party does not have it its own way. The parliament is very, very balanced. Okay, which is progress in the liberal democratic sense. The executive is what it is. The parliament is supposed to also check the executive, but the weakest link in our democracy is the judiciary. The judiciary up till now is the one that has been instrumentalized against opposition, that has been used to manipulate constitutional reviews and other things to maintain people in power. So there is a lacuna when it comes to the judiciary in West Africa. And we've been working a lot.
It is interesting at this same judiciary which your finger was the saving grace in Senegal. The judiciary, stood up to the challenge and really saved the day when the question was put before it. And that's why Senegal was able to hold very successful elections. So what do you think, made the judiciary in Senegal stand out?
Absolutely. There are many reasons, right? The thing is that you are just citing one example. Okay, the beauty of the electoral challenges that we have in the region is that in many countries, Nigeria, they being the latest one, Ghana, in the last elections and others, the judiciary was used, instead of going to the street or taking up arms, losing parties and candidates resorted to the legal framework, right? And where the legal framework is weak, then there is a problem. In Senegal, I started by saying that what Senegal has is resilient institutions. That is one strength of Senegal. And that since independence, 1960, there hasn't been a coup d'etat in the country. It is the only country alongside Cabo Verde where you've never had a military takeover in West Africa. That is one. And what also pushed the judiciary to do that, don't forget that when the president wanted to postpone the elections, the ruling coalition and the key opposition came together and blamed the same judiciary of taking bribes from their own candidate. The ruling, right. So the judiciary was now, put in a conflict with the executive in the country. If we are the judiciary and you accuse us that we are bribe takers, and then you want us to do your bidding soon afterwards, we are not going to do it. So there are many, reasons. They were accused, and the matter even went to court by the judiciary, accusing the executive of trying to accuse them of taking bribe because their presidential candidate, through their own survey, realized that he could not win the election.
I find it interesting that you put it that way.
And so, so this is what, what happened over there, in terms of Senegal. But I would say broadly, our judiciary is quite weak. And it is constitutional reviews that many have used to maintain themselves in power. Forget about electoral manipulations. If people are able to mobilize and police their vote, it's going to be incrementally very difficult for anybody to manipulate. But the executive, what they do is changing when the tenure is coming to an end through a constitutional review, and they say, okay, we send the clock back to zero, so that the terms that I have, already said do not count because we have a new constitution. Now, ECOWAS is pushing in the review that if you, a sitting president, leads a process of constitutional review, you will not benefit from it.
Interesting.
Okay, so those are some of the innovative ways that we are, working on.
Perhaps that also speaks to something, Ambassador.
Yes.
My apologies for butting in. Perhaps that also speaks to the fact that you've been talking about the government, you've been talking about institutions of government, separation of powers and all of that. However, government is always a system, and there's always a pool of employers, in this case, the people. 60% of these employers are young people, as you said the other time.
Yes.
Now, isn't it fallacious to assume that governance or politics starts from the political parties as opposed to the people, particularly in West Africa?
Yes.
Because if there is enough political education, political understanding, I don't think there will be a need for people to be pushing for protests. They will know how to strengthen their institutions, as the example of Senegal that you're giving the other time. So what's the place of political education from your perspective in West Africa, to the point that people can say, we're not going to take this, we're going to insist on this, and there will be no military push?
Yes. That is an interesting question. Yes, ECOWAS is engaging together with the civil society groups, across the region. We have got the West Africa Democracy Network, WADEMOS, which cuts across West Africa, which is working on these, questions. But let me say one thing. People do not eat democracy. Okay, and democracy is a process. In our region, it is just about 30 years old, so to speak. There are countries that have practiced democracy for centuries, and up till now, there are even presidents who will not accept results. We saw what happened in the last elections in the US, and then the other, places. So democracy, to give it sustenance, you have to add the economic and social governance to it. And this is what will make, people always defend liberal democracy. If people are hungry and you tell them, that, oh, this is, we are going for elections, we are going for, this and that, it's not going to work. So that is why the developmental aspect, and including these young people, look, the state is not the key employer in our societies. It is the private sector. How do we have public-private partnership, in order to create the environment for employment is key. Number two, I feel that the government has a responsibility to develop infrastructure. I will tell you, young people, you go to the computer, center here in Abuja, in Lagos, and other things, and you see the wonders young people can perform over there with electronics, with their gadgets and things like that. But if these young people, go through darkness, no electricity, they have electricity just about 2 hours a day, they are not going to express their agency. They can employ themselves. In fact, the young people do not need to be fed. They have the qualities. Give them the proper education, give them the infrastructure, that's the basic tool that they need, and you will see the wonders. They will be able to cater for themselves. But in most of our countries, the basic infrastructure is lacking. Medicine, medical facilities, housing, and productive education. Not just going to read and write and other things, but going through STEM education, through, the scientific knowledge to try to empower, young people. are all very critical. So this is what, I would say. The government has a role to create the environment for this to happen. And then the private sector has a very useful role. That's why we need to, support our entrepreneurs in the region, in order, to be the useful partner to governments in our region. And I think when the young people, see a bright future in front of them and that they can actually actualize their potential, it also gives strength to the democracy that we are talking about.
All right, we'll have to thank you for coming on, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security.